There we go. We have recording going. Thank you.
Got it?
Yep.
So first of all, let me just say, I'm so excited to be with all of you today. So I really appreciate this invitation and just a moment to share a little bit about my experience in study abroad. So today I'm going to talk about developing a nation and my opportunity to really create some dialogue and to make some impact that was global. So I want to start by telling you all just a little bit about myself. And forgive me, this is my pre-COVID shot, and now you get what happens when you don't see a hairstylist for a little while. So, so I'm a first-generation college student. I'm actually the first one in my family to complete college. I was raised in southeastern Missouri. I come from a pretty impoverished background. My family, we didn't have hot water or indoor toiletries until I was 17 years old. We were raised way out in the sticks in southeast Missouri. So our concept of travel was going from the southeast to the boot hill, most of my time growing up to visit family. And that's about as far as I traveled in my youth, well into my teens. But at the end of my senior year in high school, I had a car accident. And in that car accident, I broke my back. I did some damage to my legs. I suffered some disabilities, and my principal at my high school came to our house way out in the sticks and said, "Hey, I think there's this program called vocational rehabilitation that might help her to get into a community college to get started in school." And so from there, it was my first time to be introduced to college. And so I started at a community college. And here I am today, 6 degrees, a graduate certificate. I've done 3 studies abroad, much further than I thought I would ever go as a youth. And I've had the opportunity to live and travel in about 11 countries. And so my lens is completely different now than it was growing up. And I think that that's really helped me to see the world very differently and to want to encourage others to do the same thing. So many times when we think about traveling abroad, we think about how expensive it is, how we're going to do it, what does that look like? And I'm going to tell you all that you have some opportunities right where you are, where you can travel without even leaving your backyard, truthfully. So some of the things that you could do to prep or get yourself ready for maybe a future experience that's actually on foreign soil is to start learning a foreign language. I was very fortunate that my family is German. So I grew up speaking both German and English. So I'm a dual language speaker, but I managed to learn some other languages along the way while I was going to school. And when you learn a language, you also learn a culture. And so that was an excellent piece for me. Another thing that I was able to do was to volunteer at the ESL Cafe. And most institutions have some type of ESL Cafe where international students go to talk to American students, to practice their language. And in that process, you gain a friend, you gain a network from someone who has a different culture and a different perspective. And so that was another excellent opportunity that I had at the community college. And then I started working with a club and organization that was called the Friends Club that allowed me to mentor an international student and help them to understand just the lingo of college and how to get around on campus. And I started to attend lectures, presentations, started to meet international speakers who were coming in. And I took a global studies course to learn just a little bit more about the world around me because my lens was pretty narrow at that point. And then I started getting involved with some diverse populations in the area. And I know now that I'm here at Birmingham, there's a lot of amazing, amazing festivals and things that I've been able to be engaged in. So sometimes you can have that abroad experience or start that abroad experience right here in your backyard. So I hope that you all will take advantage of some of those opportunities. But then, you know, eventually you're going to want to travel. And so a lot of students will say, how am I going to pay for that? Amazingly, what I found out is that there's a lot of international scholarships, grants, and fellowships available in different areas. And sometimes the institutions abroad will also help pay for you to go there, which was something that happened for me during my experience of traveling abroad. I actually had universities that helped support my travel and paid for me to come there, which was amazing. And then I worked, I got a job to help offset. Now, sometimes that's not possible if you're already working a job and you have a family and you're trying to take care of other things, right? But you can also look at inexpensive options, destinations that are close to home. So Canada's above us, Mexico's below us. These are great places to go to study. There are some great institutions and some great exchange programs. And you can look for an internship in those areas. Or if you can't manage that, doesn't look like it's going to work out for you, look for some volunteer opportunities with a nonprofit. Learning doesn't always have to be in the classroom. Experiential learning is still that opportunity to learn abroad. So you may find a place where you can volunteer and go through a nonprofit organization. And then consider your options. I know for me, I did a lot of short-term studies abroad, but I also did a semester. Some people will do a year. Some people will complete their entire degree abroad. There's just lots of opportunities and ways to do it, but they're closer than you think, and they are manageable. If I can do it, I know others can. You just may need someone to walk you through that process. But once you've gone, you've got to make sure that you don't stop there, because you've got to build that network so you have places to go afterwards. And so after you complete your study abroad, stay in contact with those people that you saw while you're there. I know for me, social media has been amazing. WhatsApp is amazing. I still communicate with some of the people that I stayed with while I was abroad. And then I've started to get involved in international organizations. Because I work in higher ed, because I teach higher ed, I stay in those higher ed organizations, and there's lots of opportunities through commissions and things like that for us to be able to meet and connect, and those individuals then connect you with other individuals, and all of a sudden you create this huge network that's global. Also hosting international students. So ever since my children were little, my husband and I have hosted international students. So we've had over 64 international students from 40 different countries stay in our home while they were going to school here in the United States. And so that has been an amazing experience. I often say my children are a little confused because we have quite a mixed culture in our house because of that, but it's been a great opportunity. So if you finish your degree and you have that opportunity, host an international student, broaden that. We are still connected to all 64 of those international students. And I know that if I wanted to visit any of those countries, I would have someone I could reach out to. And again, I'll go back to staying involved in your community, make the connection here. And also international students at the college where you're at can connect you with places in the community that you may not even know exist. So let me tell you a little bit about my Saudi story. And this is probably my favorite experience abroad. So I had the opportunity back in 2019, a friend from my network that I'd been working with came back to me and he said, "Hey, did you see this?" It was just a random post on a website from one of the national organizations that we were both members of. And on that post, it had an opportunity for us to apply for what's called a Saudi fellow. Remember, I told you sometimes other countries will pay for you to come. And so we both applied, and I kind of laughed and I said, "I'm not so sure that I'm going to get this. My husband is actually from Saudi Arabia. I know how difficult it is for the Ministry of Higher Education to prove these things." And on the list, it said that they were going to take no more than 100 applicants, but they were pulling applications globally. So I was very surprised when I got this email that said, instead of pulling 100, they only pulled 62. They received 150 applications, and out of that were 24 women, and I just happened to be one of the women that was chosen. And what we were chosen to do was to come to Saudi Arabia to help advise them on the development of their new higher education programming. And when I say new, I definitely mean new, because Saudi Arabia is a developing country, and they've only recently started working on their higher education system, which is why many of their students still study here in the United States. So some things you might not know about Saudi Arabia. It is the largest country in the world that does not have a river. And it is dry heat when you're there. 125 was the average on the days that we were in Saudi. I loved it when we got to go inside because it was so warm. The population of Saudi Arabia is just a little bit bigger than the population of Texas, but the kingdom's population, almost 50%, is under the age of 24, and 5% is over the age of 60. So it has a large youth population, which creates a problem for the kingdom because they have a high rate of unemployment. And without having a strong infrastructure in their higher education programs, their citizens can't get the training that they need to create their economy, to build the economy there. So when you all think about Saudi Arabia, what do you think about? What do you envision it looks like? You can put it in the chat. Sand. Very rich, dry, dunes, beaches, deserts. I'll agree with you. I'll agree with you. So this is, but indeed, what most people think of when they think of Saudi Arabia. But the truth of the matter is, this is what Saudi Arabia looks like in most spaces, right? It's a developing country, but it's very industrialized, it has large cities. Going out to the desert, taking a camel ride, setting up tents, that's a vacation, right? It's more of a getaway from the city than a place where people live. And so we have to think about how the media can impact what we think of another country or what that looks like. But it does have a beautiful, beautiful cities within. I'm not saying it's perfect. It has its flaws, most definitely. But I think every country around the world has its flaws. So we could point both ways, but definitely a developing country looking for ways to increase industry, infrastructure, technology. Oh, somebody's dad works in Saudi Arabia for a little while. I love it. I'd love to hear more about that, actually. So why the focus on higher education in the kingdom? Why did they bring all of us from across the world in to talk to them about their higher education system? Why did they want our advice on what they were doing? So like I said earlier, higher education is relatively new. It's just barely over 60 years old. The first kingdom's university was King Saud's, and it was built in 1957. So if you have a population that is predominantly under the age of 25, you need a strong university system. And the problem is that Saudi Arabia did not have that. They had the money and the power to build institutions. And in a short 10-year span, they actually built 24 state-of-the-art universities, but they had a problem. Can you all guess what that problem was?
No teachers.
Say it again.
No teachers.
No teachers, no instructors, no faculty. That was great. They did not have they didn't have the indigenous knowledge. They didn't have individuals who could work in the country, in the university. So a lot of these institutions sat empty for a while after they were built. And they needed to build indigenous knowledge. They needed to increase those who were getting an education, men and women. And they just didn't have the capacity within their nation to do that. So they had a 25% unemployment rate for quite some time. And they had to work to figure out how they were going to change that. And so one of their first steps, King Abdullah created a scholarship program, which we call CASP. And the King Abdullah Scholarship Program started in 2005. And there were 3 waves of this program that brought students to other countries to study in their higher education programs. And they did something that was very unique because many other countries in the Middle East, in the Gulf regions, what they were doing was they were importing higher ed. So Qatar built something called Education City, and they had a Texas A&M university that they built. And then they brought faculty from Texas A&M to Qatar to teach their students. They also had a Houston Community College that was built in Qatar, and Johns Hopkins built a branch in Qatar. And when I say built a branch, Qatar built the building, they just brought the people, right? And so they imported education, but Saudi Arabia said, not going to do it that way because we want to create our own knowledge and our own ideologies. So we're going to send our students out to get the education and then bring them back after they've got it to become faculty to work in these universities. So this scholarship, the first wave came in 2005, then there was a second wave, and right now they're in their third wave. And the third wave are the students who've already finished their bachelor's degree who are coming back and doing their master's and PhDs. And these individuals are the ones who are going to end up going back and teaching in the universities so they can now start developing their indigenous knowledge. And we were there to talk about what that process would look like, what kind of degree programs they would need to offer there, because the kingdom also started to recognize that they're not always going to be dependent on oil. They're going to have to find other ways of doing business, of revenue for the kingdom. They just cannot hold on to that oil for the long run. They have to have something else. So this was the opportunity for them to train their students and then bring their students back. So what does it look like when you're sitting at the table in Saudi Arabia talking about their education system? This is really what it looks like in the bigger sessions. So all of these individuals that you see sitting down there are presidents, deans, academic leaders in the universities across the kingdom. And we met with them for 5 days. We always had a large session like this, and then we would have smaller sessions. And so I don't know if you can tell from the picture because it's kind of small, but there's men and women sitting together in these sessions because the women's colleges and the men's colleges and the private colleges where the men and women are also going to school together, because in Saudi, remember, they still have set segregation between men and women in their educational system, but they're starting to really rethink some of those processes and what that looks like. So you think of it over there, the private institutions is where you can experiment in that way. The public institutions, not so much, but that's changing now. And so my concern going was, if you haven't guessed, I'm pretty outspoken, was I'm a woman, you're bringing me over to advise you on your educational system, and the first thing I see is this huge disparity between men and women, and are they going to get a voice at the table? And I was pleasantly surprised because not only did they get a voice, but for 3 of those 5 days, they got the stage. And they got to talk about the problems and the things that were going on, and they got to make requests for funding. Now, not all the men stayed in the audience while they had the conversation, but the reality is they got a seat at the table. They were put at the head of the table, and they got the opportunity to voice what they needed to say. For Saudi Arabia, this was a huge improvement. And it was amazing to see what came out of this afterwards, because a lot came out of this afterwards. So still some separation, still some things that were different than what I would expect here in the United States in education, but it was such a great opportunity. And then when we were done with the big sessions, we got to separate into smaller sessions. And because individuals had come, had been invited and got fellows like me from other places around the world, I got to sit down at the table with one of the women who was a founder for the Bologna process in Europe. I got to meet with a woman from Bolivia. I got to meet with a scholar from Spain who was doing some neuroscience experiments and partnering here. I got to meet with some recruiters out of Greece. The amazing piece is that all of these people that I got to meet who were in these huge positions in their own countries are now part of my network. And we still communicate, and we share things on WhatsApp, and we email each other, we reach out to one another, we research together, we study together. So we're still connected because of this one experience. So the King Abdullah Scholarship really helped to meet that goal of expanding higher education within the kingdom. So the students went abroad, they started gaining knowledge in different areas, bringing that back. Saudi Arabia all of a sudden They built 24 institutions in 10 years. Now they've expanded that to over 30 public universities, 14 private universities, 42 specialized private colleges that concentrate predominantly on health, and then a variety of community colleges, well over 100. And what's amazing about that is when they started their higher education system, community colleges are actually something that's unique from the American model. Other countries didn't have the community college until America created the community college. And so at first, Saudi wasn't all about the community college. Like, what's that and what's its purpose? But they borrowed that model from us, and now they have the community college, and it's really helped them to build their workforce, which is what the community college is for. And so more than half of those that enrolled in higher ed just happen to be women. Women are actually being educated at a faster rate there than men are. And their enrollments have really grown. So back in 1970, when they barely had their foot wet in higher education, they had about 7,000 students. But now on their own soil, in their own institutions, they have 1.2 million that are attending. So why are they doing this? They have a visionary plan. It's called Vision 2030. And it's about diversifying their economy through innovation, through change, through looking at the world in a different way. So one of the things that we got to talk about while we were in Saudi, looking at their higher education systems, talking to those who were in power, those who had the ability to create this change, to move it forward, while we're giving them all of these ideas and we're talking through things, they shared with us this vision plan and how they want to move away from their sole dependency on oil to diversify what's in the economy so people can start building their own businesses, so that they can start bringing tourism and things like this in. And so we had a lot of conversations about renewable energy, especially solar power and wind power, because obviously in a desert country, there's lots of space where people aren't living, but that's space where the sun is shining and they can build energy from that. We also talked about the private sector. So what's considered private sector? So right now, a lot of what we think of as private sector here in the United States is not private sector there. Healthcare, municipalities, housing finance, the banking system, everything is under the monarchy. It's under the kingdom's rule. So the government has clear power over that. And what they're trying to do is move that over to small businesses, to corporations, to better develop the economy so that it can run itself without being dependent upon the kingdom to support the people, but for the people to be able to support themselves. And so these were the conversations we were having. How to do that? What does that look like? What's the role of higher education in that process? And it was amazing to get to work in these small work groups where we talked about these things. It was also amazing as a woman to sit at tables that were male dominated, and for them to give us that voice and to take what we were providing to work it with their groups and to create something that was very culturally sensitive and normed for what they need in their country, but that we had the ability to give insight and input on that so that collectively we could do something that was for the greater good. One of the challenges in Saudi Arabia in higher education right now is that there's not a lot of autonomy. So we think about academic freedom and these types of things in higher ed. So faculty, they can't just prepare their curriculum like they want. The admissions processes are not how each institution wants them. They're all governed by the government through the Ministry of Education. And so one of the things that the government is asking the ministry to do is to give more autonomy, but they have to define what that autonomy looks like, because they want the universities to be able to figure out their own admissions policies, their own curriculum, their own quotas for enrollment, to select their own faculty and their own specialty areas for different programs that they want to offer in their institutions. And that's never been done before. It isn't done in K-12. Everything's defined by the government, and it isn't done in higher ed. And so this will be a slower move, but a huge shift for the country, because it doesn't just mean changing education systems, it means changing the way we think about interacting globally. And for the longest time, Saudi Arabia has kind of been in a bubble, right? They don't intermingle a lot in those ways with the rest of the world. And so this is exposing them more to other ideas, other perceptions of how to do higher education, what programs to teach. It's giving some independence to the people. Again, even though the government has been in control, the people have become dependent on the government for these things. And as the country diversifies and grows their economy and moves away from that model, individuals within this country have to learn to stand on their own. Right now, if you're unemployed, the government is paying you a stipend, so you have housing and everything like that. But if you can start your own business, if you can be an entrepreneur, if you can have options, then this changes the trajectory for the government and for the people there and for the freedoms that they will have in the future. So as the government seeks to decentralize the system, it'll be amazing to see what happens in the future and where this is headed. So what did I learn? You're looking at the Ministry of Higher Ed from Jordan here, and the gentleman next to him is Malik, and he's the director of the Ministry of Higher Ed in Saudi Arabia. What I learned here is that a small town girl from southeastern Missouri who came from a very difficult background can travel, can have a voice, and can put input in on something this big that can change not only what's going on in Saudi Arabia, but how Saudi Arabia communicates with the rest of the world. And that was most definitely worth the experience. And because it was an opportunity that I applied for, I didn't have to pay for it. They were my host, and they wanted my voice, and they wanted the voices of the other people there. And I think that there are lots of opportunities out there like this, but sometimes we don't always look for them, or we don't know that they exist. So making those networks, connecting, even where you are right now, all of this started simply because I joined a club and I started sitting at an ESL cafe. It was that easy. What questions do you all have for me?
You should all be able to unmute yourselves if you would like to talk to Dr. Bass. Or you can put it in the chat.
Okay. So I have a bachelor's degree in religion. I have actually, I have 2 associate's degrees. I should say that first. I have an associate's degree, just a general studies associate's degree, and I also have associate's degree in education. My bachelor's degree is in religion. My first master's degree is in English, teaching English as a second language. And then my second master's degree is in adult and higher ed. My PhD degree is in adult and higher ed with an emphasis in administration. And then I have a graduate certificate in international student services. Too many, right? I'm addicted to it now. I love education. I love learning. Any other questions?
I have a question,
Sure.
Dr. Bass. First of all, thank you for this amazing presentation. It was really fascinating, like an insider's look at a country that I have not been to yet. So thank you for that. And I was, when we're from one culture and we go to another culture, we run into cultural differences that can create difficulties, or even moral questions. If the 2 cultures have different points of view or different perspectives, specifically about the role of women. And it's interesting that you're talking about the changes that are taking place. But I wondered if you had any advice for us with how to manage remaining true to your own values while being in a culture that may not actually support them, or certainly not all the time. That's a complicated question.
It is complicated. And so let's kind of break that down a little bit. So know that I didn't go into this, with eyes closed. I absolutely, my husband's Saudi, but I wouldn't call him a typical Saudi. He married me and he knows I can't keep my mouth shut most of the times because I'm one who says what she thinks sometimes. And I do stick my foot in my mouth every once in a while. And I'm okay with that. But the reality is, I know the culture. I do speak Arabic. Not as well as I would like to speak it, but well enough to not get myself in too much trouble, at least to get directions to get back where I need. I know the cultural do's and don'ts. When I was there, are there some things that bothered me? Absolutely, there were some things that bothered me. There were some things I saw that I didn't approve of, that I didn't like. But I also reminded myself of something, that we're very privileged here. And sometimes I think we forget the privilege that we have where we are. And while we're in another country, we've got to respect whatever their norms are, whatever their cultural standards are, whatever their laws are, because those things apply to us while we're there. So you have to pick and choose. There are some things that I can hold my tongue on, and there's some things that I can't, but I like my head where it's at. And so you got to obey the law. You've got to do what's right. But that also gives you the opportunity to see what's there and to speak for advocacy. I had a seat at a table that was pretty big. I was in a position that was pretty powerful for me to be in. So I can go in rip roaring and angry about some of those things I saw, or I can recognize it's a developing country and I don't want to colonize it with my own belief systems, but they are going to have to develop and get to that space on their own to decide what they want and what they're going to allow. And part of that is education. And so I think things are going to change in many ways, and already have, even since I was there in 2019. Things have already changed quite a bit. I have two sister-in-laws who had never driven, and now they're driving everywhere, right? So things are changing there. But I also have to respect that it's got to change in its time. Our country didn't become what it is today overnight. And they'll certainly move forward faster because of technology and that infrastructure being built, which, we've come up with that with the other first worlds. But I have to allow that to develop on its own. But when I come back, I also need to be respectful of how I talk about that experience and recognize that maybe not everything I saw was bad. Maybe what I saw was different. Maybe it wasn't acceptable to me, but it is the norm for them. And as you all know, norms change in America all the time. Norms are going to change there as well, but I've got to give them their time to develop to get there. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much.
Oh, y'all are fast on the chat. Are there any specific platforms that you would recommend using to seek out volunteer opportunities abroad? So a lot of my volunteer opportunities abroad have come through networking. So I would say start networking. You've got to build that web, and then those opportunities usually will come to you through Snapchat, through Facebook, through somebody reaching out because they know someone. So it really is about building that network when you think about international work. So you've got to do that. People want to know who you are before they offer you the volunteer opportunity.
Can I chime in on that one, Dr. Boss?
Yeah, go ahead.
So another thing that you can look at if you want volunteer opportunities is some of the program we mentioned in the first seminar, the Gilman Scholarship. There are programs that exist for you to do volunteer experiences that you pay for. And the Gilman is an accessible way to do that. There's Peace Corps you heard about last week, but there's also other ones, domestic ones like AmeriCorps, which is the equivalent of Peace Corps.
Yeah.
Does domestic programs, and a lot of them are social justice or working with diverse communities based. Those are really low hanging fruit if you're looking for that. There's also a lot of, like, my nephew did coffee farming with a co-op in Latin America, and it cost him very little, but it is something that you can look at. There's also some study abroad organizations that, like my community colleges works with Maximo Nivel, based out of Peru, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, and they do 2-week volunteer programs in a lot of different fields. You could do construction, you can work in the forests, you can work in healthcare settings to get a little bit of the taste of experience, but it is a really different flavor. There are a lot of ways to access that. There is one website that you might want to look at. It's very broad. It's called goabroad.com. That one has a lot of those type of experiences. And I will get a list of those resources together, and we will share that in a future email, because I know I've blast y'all enough as it is, but that will be one that I'll send out to everybody.
That's great. Thank you, Stacy. Are there any good online language classes, websites, or resources? I'm going to tell you right now, I love Duolingo. So I was raised with a grandmother who spoke German, which means I speak German like an 80-year-old. And when I went to Germany and I lived in Germany, all of the young guys and girls that I was hanging out with spoke, modern German with all their jargon and things that I didn't know. And I kept getting the comment that, you sound like my 80-year-old grandma. Well, because my 80-year-old grandma taught me German growing up. And so here we are. But Duolingo has been great, no cost, just an app. But there are lots of things out there. But I tell you what, the best thing you can do is enroll in a class, even if it's just a community class, right? And then start talking to people who know the language. There are lots of multilingual individuals that live in this area and other areas around you. I am sure of it. It's just getting into those communities and having those conversations to create some friendships. Listen, when you learn a language, you learn a culture, you learn do's and taboos, you learn how to better negotiate yourself in those spaces, and that will be priceless when you go abroad. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Yes, ma'am, Dr. Ross. My name is Karen. I have worked abroad over in Kenya and Rwanda. I taught women's integration over there, and I taught some of the first female pilots that were entering into the Army over there. And it was a difficult challenge in some ways, just trying to structure the men and the women together, and how they'll have to work together as a team, and how their teamwork will affect their mission. Mm-hmm. And that was quite the challenge. But at the overall endpoint, like I just fell in love with Africa as a whole, the people and everything. And I went back over there to work during the Ebola outbreak. But one of the areas I'm going to try to go back to is down to Nairobi. I want to try to do some volunteer time. My cousin has a program called Take Heart, and they work for widowed women and children over there in Nairobi.
Nice. I love it. I love it.
But
my heart, go ahead.
We just have to, like as Americans, we have to put down, we can't just go in there waving our flags and pushing our American values and views and our norms on the people. And like I've learned that their humbleness, you must like inculcate yourself with that, and just learn to humble yourself down, and that the American way isn't always the best way on some of this stuff. And it just helps you learn to be a more well-rounded person and be able to look at the mission that you're there for as a bigger and better thing. Just taking in some of their stuff and mixing it with your stuff, and just trying to open your eyes and not just put your views out there of like, well, why are the women this way? Why are the men this way? And it just helps you like, oh, okay, I understand. It is happens over there, but I'm like I learned that wasn't my place to be able to call out shots of how their cultures do things. But like, at the end of the day, I made some great friends, and I went back. I sent boxes of clothes over to a few of the women and stuff over there, and it was like I just fell in love with that.
Karen, I think we're losing you a little bit.
I learned how to speak some Swahili while I was there also.
I think we're losing you. Oh, I think we lost her. So
but I'm like, I love just to travel. Driving through the back 40.
Okay.
I loved your speech and of how like the different cultural challenges sometimes, but at the end of the day, you learn to love it and embrace it.
Absolutely, Karen. I agree with you. So I've been in several countries now, and I've learned that the American way isn't the only way, and it's also not the right way. It's just one way of many things. And I think sometimes we often think that we're going to go in and fix everything, and that's very American to do that. And we're stereotyped by that around the globe. And so when we step in and we learn from that culture, we can also bring things back. And I think we miss that sometimes in those study abroad experiences. What are you going to bring back? What are you going to bring back from that cultural experience, from those relationships that you've built there, that's going to impact not just your world, but the world of the people around you? And so I think that's so important, like to recognize that we might think that there's an easier way to do something, or there's a better way for individuals to treat one another. But it's not for us to make that judgment while we're there. It's for us to learn from them, to share what they want us to share, and then to take from them what they're willing to share with us. And so I think that's so important in the process, and to recognize that we come from a point of privilege. Again, we're a first world nation. And so some things we're taking for granted, and we're like, well, I don't understand why you're just not doing that. Well, we may not understand the financial structure that's going to support that, or that's needed there, or the protections that's needed that aren't in place yet because they're still developing. And so it's better for us to take a step back, humble ourselves, learn from that experience, and negotiate ourselves within that culture instead of trying to push our culture and our ideas off on others. I totally agree with that. And I love that you were working with women abroad. I love working with women abroad. Many times the things that I've done abroad have been to work with women in education. And I really do, with all my heart, believe that, education is how the world changes and how the world matures and grows. And those perspectives that we share as a world come from being educated about one another. Did anyone else have any questions?
No, ma'am, that was fine.
Well, I think unless anybody else, so well, everybody, as you can see, you see why I love her, right? So thank you so much, Marianne, for coming today. I'm so grateful for you taking the time to join us. So we have East Coast, West Coast here. We've had California community college as well as Alabama. So some of the resources we know is based in our region of Central Alabama, but California, you have so many resources because cultural diversity there is so great. So, but check with your schools, check with your community colleges. Dr. Voss, can we have your PowerPoint to share?
Yeah, I can send it to you.
Okay, great. I knew she would. So I'll be sending that out to everybody. I've already sent out the calendar for the rest of the event. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I will send out a separate email with the link since the QR code is not popular. So you can do your follow-up showing that you've attended. So thank you all so much for making it today. And I hope to see you next Friday for the next installment. So thank you so much.